We'll get this. All right. Welcome to the Real Estate 100 show, where we have today Tom Storey from the Tom Storey Show from YouTube and Canada's cutest realtor. I really appreciate you coming on, Tom. You, in all honesty, are probably one of the most quoted real estate agents in Canada, especially when it comes to the media. And you have a lot of amazing insights. I know we share a lot about our YouTube journey together, and I'm absolutely stoked to have you on today. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'd say like normally people that watch our podcast see me beside Steve. So I'm cute compared to Steve. I don't know in general, but it's easy when you're beside Steve for an hour every week. But I'm excited to be here, and yeah, this will be fun.
Well, we might call this the Rose Between Two Thorns episode, because you're definitely cute compared to both of us as well.
He's got no beard though.
Well, it's because I can't grow it, not because I don't want one. Yeah.
That's why he's not on the podcast, right? He's doesn't have a beard.
So yeah, you can't be on the podcast without a beard. It's just not doable.
Awesome. Last episode, I went on a rant about realtors and how they should stop writing financing conditions for Fridays so that their clients weren't all upset and the sellers weren't all upset about having to extend till a Monday and then maybe not have it happen. And we kind of dug in a little bit on real estate agents and making fun of them. And I have to pull this up for you guys because I just saw this here today. I'm going to add it to the stream. This is hilarious. Because this is our good friend, Tom, Matt Leonetti.
Mortgage brokers. I say this with love.
Attention mortgage brokers.
But I get about 20 DMs a week asking me to go to lunch, and I'm not doing it. You're always like, yeah, it's on me. Yeah, of course it's on you. You're a stranger asking me to go to lunch to talk about interest rates. Something we've done in a 2-minute phone call. You've opted for a 3-hour lunch at fucking Panera Bread. I mean, I'm not trying to be on mortgage at first sight here, okay? I don't want to go on an awkward blind date with you. I've been on one first date in my entire life. That's my now wife. Seal the deal and it's done. I'm not doing it again. Instead, just be really good at your job. I mean, that's how I met my guy, Johnson Andrews. Didn't know who he was. Did a deal together. Best experience I've ever had. Now he's my number one guy. Turns out the guy's fucking David Copperfield of mortgages. Who knew? That's all I need. What I don't need is listen to you talk about how incredible you are over chicken tenders at Ruby Tuesdays on a Wednesday afternoon. Mortgage.
All right. So for all of our viewers who, all probably 6 of them at this point who don't know Matt Leonetti, probably one of the funniest guys in real estate. But I think this is so funny. There's definitely going to be a rebuttal here about asking mortgage brokers to pay for their advertising. But here you are on the Real Estate 100 show, sitting between 2 mortgage brokers. Yeah. So kind of a good segue into the conversations we're going to have today. And I think we're going to touch on a few things. First and foremost, scalable income. How you got into the real estate game, because you really are one of the top realtors in Canada. And I don't say that just because you've sold the most houses, but you've been one of the most honest and probably one of the most impactful real estate agents when it comes to the media and whatnot. And then we're going to talk about not having family money, because Greg, who isn't here today, has talked quite extensively about going to the bank of mom and dad. And we'll talk a little bit about what you can do if you don't have the bank of mom and dad to go to. And then winners and losers in real estate. We're going to talk about the last couple of years, what's happened, who's won, who's lost. And then we'll talk a little bit about being careful what you wish for with respect to regulations and some things that you were talking about before we came on about things that may be coming down the pipe for Canadian buyers and why they may not necessarily be in their best interest. So, let's start with the basics. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you got into real estate and your journey to get here.
Sure. So before I get into me, Matt had said in that video that his mortgage guy was a David Copperfield of mortgages. So what one of you is David Blaine, I guess, and the other one is like another magician I can't think of. We got to figure out what it is as we move forward.
Hopefully not Siegfried or Roy, right?
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me here. So basically my story is I've been selling real estate in Toronto for 10 years. This is all I've ever done in serious capacity. I started getting my real estate license when I was in 4th year university, and that's all I did. So I basically, like, as I came out of school, I got right into it. I joined under a team that it was like my aunt's friend sold real estate. I'm like, okay, he's the one person I know that sells real estate. I'll go work with him. Right. Worked with him for 6 months, learned a lot, very like small boutique style brokerage. But at this point, I was 22 years old. I certainly couldn't afford to buy real estate. I was living in my parents' basement. My friends couldn't afford to buy real estate, and their parents didn't trust me as a real estate agent, right? And whether it's mortgages or real estate or anything else, what no one tells you is like every training you go to, they're like, don't worry, you just got to get people to know, like, and trust you. It's like, but when you start your career, you're like, okay, they know me. I think they like me, but they don't trust me as a real estate agent yet, right? Whatever it is that you do. And I had a lot of people that I consider very, very good friends. Some people even in my extended family that when I got started that first year were like, we like you, but we're not using you. Like, this is too big of an investment, too big of an asset. And you've been doing this for 6 months. And I think a lot of people that had this happen, this puts them down to the fact that they give up pretty quickly. And you hear the stat all the time that I think, 20% of real estate agents make it to the 2-year mark. But the stat that doesn't get brought up a lot is that only 13% make it to the 5-year mark. So it's making sure at the beginning of your career, you're never burning bridges. You just prove people wrong. You keep working and working and working. And then what it really was for me and why I got so big into the video content and try to come from it from an educational approach is that as I was starting to build out my business a little bit more, and I started in Toronto doing leases. So I built my entire database of clients by running ads on Kijiji and Facebook and things like that. And really, really just like working to survive until I could afford to buy my first place, which was like this tiny little condo, but it got me into the market. And as I continued to grow the business, it was just like, okay, well, what do I need to do? And I was frustrated on a level of, okay, I felt like at that point, I knew what I was talking about. I really believe that I gave a great client experience, but I was like, why is no one calling me? Like, what's going on here? I was so frustrated because I was like, when I get the opportunity, it seems to go really well and they like me and they tell their friends about me, but I need more opportunities. So what really got me into starting videos, which then snowballed into opportunities in the media, was I was like, I need people to know who I am. It doesn't matter if I'm good at this. If no one knows if I'm good at this, it doesn't matter. So I made these little dinky 2-minute market update videos in my basement with the first one I filmed on an iPad mini or something. Like, it was so bad, no audio. Well, there's audio, but it was crappy audio. And I just kept doing it. And I think the only thing actually that I think I had versus other people that didn't last is I was consistent with it. I just kept banging them out month after month after month. And then people started noticing and people started being like, hey, Tom, I watch your stuff. I'm ready to buy a place. And I'm like, I didn't even know you existed. And so that's kind of what the last 10 years has looked like. Now I've built out a bigger team and I have a lot more support as well, but certainly was a struggle from the beginning.
Yes. I mean, definitely an exercise in persistence. People don't realize how hard it is. They look at how much commission a real estate agent might make, but man, they do not realize the work that goes into establishing yourself and then actually making sales and being capable enough to actually sell a house and not lose a bunch of money for a client, right? Now, you mentioned one thing there. You mentioned that you went to university, which means at some point you had bigger dreams and aspirations than becoming a realtor. What happened there? What were you taking in university? What did you want to be when you grew up? And then how did you end up in? And I have a similar story where I kind of backwards found my way into mortgages. But how did you find your way from university to that?
So I was never great at school. Grade 11, I failed like half my classes, had to do summer school just to get by, and then figured it out. And then like grade 12, I was like, okay, you better actually apply yourself, and got into university, had good grades to get into university. But at that point, it was like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. My mother was always in sales, but in a different industry. And so I went to university for sociology, like basically the study of people, right? Like, but what happened was in third year, and this is so funny. It's so funny how life works. Like, I was working with my uncle and he had a business that would hang TVs on people's walls. And this was like, 10, 12 years ago now. Mm-hmm. These TVs were heavy and you'd go into the houses and you'd help them put them on the walls. And one of the houses we did, the guy came home, like the owner, and this was like a nice house. And he showed up and I'm like, I was like, what do you do? Like, who are you? And he's like, oh, I own a Remax or something. And I don't know why, for some reason, it just stuck with me. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I looked into a little bit more, like, could I start my licensing? And I think part of it too, like, I started taking my license when I was 21 years old and started actively trying to sell real estate when I was 22. And I actually think being super naive about it helped me, because this wasn't like, since I was a kid, I was 100% going to do this. I was like, might as well give this a shot. I got nothing to lose. And I think the one thing as well, other than being consistent, is that I'm coachable. If I know something works and I have enough, examples behind it, I'm willing to just follow a plan kind of blindly, because I know the results are eventually going to come.
Definitely. Is there like a motivating factor there for you? I mean, scalable income is something I always talk about on my channel with respect to it being one of the foundations of really building wealth, whether it's having a job that you also have a side hustle with, whether it means having more hours or whether it means the ability to move up the ranks. What was there a piece of that scalable income piece that was the driving force for you, or like what gets you up in the morning? Why are you going out there and trying to sell houses?
Yeah, my mindset has shifted very much on this. Like at the beginning of my career, truthfully, it was like survival, right? What got me up was like trying to make enough money to move out on my own. And then when you do that, it's the next thing. And it's like, okay, well, now I'm making enough money to run the business I'm trying to do. And then, you become a parent, and it's like, okay, well, now everything is just to make sure that your kid has the best life possible, right? But the scalability, so the way that I looked at it always was, and I talked to my friends, because I had a lot of other friends I played hockey with growing up that would go to like Ivy League schools, and they go directly into their bank or financing jobs, and they're making really, really good income right off the bat. And I certainly was not. And then what I realized was, okay, you look at like how life works in terms of most industries, the only way to quote unquote like cheat the system is sales, in my opinion. Like if you're really good at sales, no one gets to tell you, oh, you haven't been doing this long enough to go sell a property worth that amount of money or speak with these people. Where in other industries, it's like, well, you can't get the promotion yet because you don't have 2 years of experience. And so the scalability of like, no one gets to tell me I can't do that. And I still to this day have like, when I sit down with sellers at a kitchen table, I recognize I still look young. Imagine what I looked like 10 years ago. It's like, I better show up and know what the hell I'm talking about as well. And, but what's interesting too, is like, yes, there's no ceiling, but there's also no floor in real estate. Mm-hmm. But then you realize pretty quickly, like how you spend your time. And I got super obsessed early on with real estate coaching and like building the business, where also how could I tiger proof my business, right? And that goes back to the Siegfried and Roy. Yeah, so that goes back to the Siegfried and Roy. And this is a Dean Jackson thought. I've learned so much from him. And it's basically like, okay, those two guys had a show with a tiger. Mm-hmm. And then unfortunately, one of them got mauled by the tiger. That show's done. That was $1 million contract they had, right? And that show's done. They're done. Their business was not tiger proof. No. Where the opposite of that is the Blue Man Group. Yeah. What do you expect when you show up to a Blue Man Group? Some blue man hitting on some drums. Like, you don't know who the people are. They could interchange them in and out. But those guys, right?
Yeah, so bald guy with blue face paint, right?
Right. Yeah. So I love that analogy. I was like, okay. And I heard that like 5 years ago from Dean. And I was like, all right, well, how do I tiger proof my business? Like, is there a way to scale, my time, my income, and then just the leverage that you possibly have, right? Mm-hmm. And at the beginning, you have to put in the hard work. And I did that for many, many years. So I worked, 12 to 16-hour days and really just like got to the point where I burned out many, many times. I was like, okay, I need to bring in help. I need to bring in an assistant. And then now I have agents that help with our buyers, and I have, a full-time staff that deals with everything. So I can just focus on certain aspects. And then what was interesting is when the pandemic hit, if you go back to March 2020, we didn't even know if real estate services and at the time, maybe mortgage is as well. We didn't know before they made the announcement if it was even going to be like a service that we were allowed to do. Like, is this something we can even do? And I remember at that moment sitting down at the kitchen table with my wife and writing down like, how long can we survive on the money in our bank if I can't sell a house again for 12 months? Because you didn't know what was going to happen. And it was kind of terrifying. And then what stemmed out of that is for 2 years leading up to that, even though truthfully, I didn't think my video production quality was that good or anything, but for a realtor, I had good video production, right? Not compared to people that actually do it for a living. And all these other realtors were like, how do you do that? And I was like, I don't have time to, I can help you, but I don't have time to. And I was like, okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity here. So then I launched a course during the pandemic, and that started bringing in, and then that helped me scale my income. And then instead of doing it in person, I pre-recorded it and sold it so I didn't have to be there. And then that's when I started realizing, like, oh, this is pretty cool. And you can put the right people in the right places. And if people trust you, they're willing to buy the product.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny. I had the same issue, like kind of growing up as a mortgage broker, walking into the first couple of rooms I walked into or meetings I walked into, having that, like, you're 15. How are you possibly going to do this? And then just consistently, that wasn't a problem for Miles. Miles has been able to grow a beard since he was 8.
I've looked like I'm 30 since I was 12. So that's what it is.
But it's interesting because I was talking to my son this week, who's 10. And we were talking about the fact that he's been leaning into hard stuff. So, and there's this is, as new fathers, both of you, Miles has one on the way. Tom, yours is almost one, just over one now?
Almost 1.5 now. Yeah.
Almost 1.5. So one of the things that I learned actually from Tom Ferry, another real estate coach, and I learned it from which book to find the information in from him. And then I went and read the book, but there's something about children, and between grade 3 and grade 4, they'll be faced with problems, and at that point in time, they'll either choose to lean into those problems or they'll choose to sit back. And whatever habit they form in those years, basically between 9 and 10 years old, is probably going to be what happens to them for the rest of their life. So if they learn to lean in, they'll always lean in. And if they learn to sit back, they'll always sit back. And I see this so consistently, one with clients who have credit problems, 2 in the comment section of YouTube. It's like you can see exactly whether they're the lean in type of person or the lean back type of person. And I think what's interesting about today's real estate market is you're finding that people who lean into problems are finding ways to buy houses, and which is, I think, is a really important part about why I wanted to have you as one of the first guests on this show, is because you are in one of the most expensive real estate markets in North America, if not the world, but you still have a lot of clients that are still buying. And, Miles, what does your dad always say about millennials and kids who are getting into the real estate market?
He's got lots to say about that. I can pick on him too because he's not here. This is great.
That's why we didn't have him on this show.
Yeah, he's always had that mentality that you can get anything done, think positive, and all this stuff. But he always tells people, he says, talk to your parents, go to the bank of mom and dad. The bank of mom and dad will help. And sometimes that works. And I can tell you from personal experience, I went to the bank. When I bought my first house, went to dad and said, "Hey, Dad, what's up?" To which I got a loan that I paid back over the course of 5 years, whatever. But, some people don't have that. And I think that's, one of the things that, is really worthwhile bringing up and talking about is, what about those people that want to buy houses, those first-time home buyers that don't have the ability to go to mom and dad and say, "Hey, can I borrow 20% down to buy this $1 million plus home?"
Yeah. So what are you seeing, Tom? I mean, expensive real estate market, not everyone has that access. The guys who are getting in, what's happening?
Yeah, well, I think we have to break down as well. A lot of people look at the market and go, "I can't buy anything." But when you start asking the right questions, what you realize is they can't buy what they want. Is usually typically in our market. And I can tell you, like, the first property I bought for myself, I didn't like it that much. Like, I was like, it's fine, but I got in. I found a way to get in, and I lived with my parents until that point. And I was like, I just don't want to rent. There's nothing wrong with it if you have to rent, but I was just like, I just don't want to. I want to get into the market. And but I look at it from a few different ways, right? So we talk about this a lot in our show as well with Steve, because Steve loves going on rants. But like, he's like, Canadians are complainers. It's our second nature to complain about everything, right? And you can be a giver or taker, and you can complain, or you can just figure out a way to make it happen, right? And to say like, okay, we'll just figure it out is like, well, that's not actually that helpful. Like, well, what do I do, right? And other than the like kind of lame advice of like, well, stop buying that $3 coffee and stop getting avocado toast and that kind of stuff. It's like, well, I can tell you what I've seen personally from clients that don't have that. The first one is easy, which is, okay, you can't afford what you want, but you can afford this. if we got you into this right now and we look at the last 40 years of data in this market, and you're willing to hold this asset for 5 years, where potentially, very conservatively, when we run these numbers, where potentially could you be in 5 years from now financially if you bought this versus continuing to rent and trying to save for what you actually want to buy, right? So, buying what you can afford, not necessarily what you want, is the first way to look at it. The second way to look at it is co-ownership. So I had two really, really good friends. They're actually one of my first sales I ever did back in early 2014. They bought a condo together 50-50. It was a 2-bedroom, and they were in their early 20s. They lived there together, and then they moved out as that time happened in their life. They kept it for a few more years, rented it out as an asset, and then sold it and split the profits. And then they bought houses. They each bought a house. And financially, they wouldn't have been able to buy that house unless they got into that property. Now, I will say with co-ownership, it's like, you better know the other person really well. You better have a legal agreement, a trust agreement, whatever you need to do. Like, it's not for everybody. But if it is something that you're willing to look at, I mean, it's like basically buying with a spouse versus buying with yourself, right? The bank would assume, I would assume on the mortgage side, you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, do they look at two people buying any different than a husband and a wife buying?
Nope, not really.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
So you just put them as other, and you're up to the races.
So it's dual income, right? It's gonna help you get in. So those would be the first two, and then the third one, which is kind of interesting, is if you're in the mindset of, okay, I really want to get into the market, but I'm not. I can't either afford, or I don't like the prices in the big city that I live in, or wherever you live, right? Like in my circumstance, it's Toronto. Well, could you go to Kitchener? Could you go to Guelph? And could you buy a property where it's your first property, but it's like you're a first time investment buyer, if that makes any sense? Mm-hmm. Where, let's say they're in a building in Toronto, because the way it works in Toronto is if you're in a rent controlled building, it means it was built before November 15th, 2018, where after that, there's no rent control, which a lot of people don't realize. But let's say you're in a building and you've got really, really good rental payments, and you're like, okay, this is good. I'm doing okay in the stock market as well, but I want to get into the property market, but I can't afford, I can't buy what I want to buy. Buy outside as an investment, rent it out. Like, I know it's not your primary residence then, you got to deal with capital gains down the road, but still better than having nothing. Mm-hmm. So those would be the three ways I could look at it, at least, where like you do have options. Not everyone's going to love the options, but they do exist.
Yeah. So it's really one of those things of having proper expectations. And, it's funny because you think about the way like millennials are branded as entitled. And I so rarely see any sort of entitlement with the millennial people that I know, with the exception of there's one realtor in Calgary who, like, every single client he sends us, it's like he found the batch. He's one of them, and he's and there's like 8 of them in the city, and he knows all 8 of them.
He's got his niche. He's got his niche market down.
That's his niche. We had to have a conversation about that once upon a time. But other than that, like, you very rarely see the entitlement that boomers kind of expect that millennials have, except when it comes to their expectations with respect to real estate and, in a lot of cases, finance, right? So I think it's, I think that's interesting. I think having those expectations, like when I was 20 years old and I bought my first place, I didn't go and buy the super expensive house. I found a condo that was affordable and bought it, and then moved up the property ladder. And by the way, made the single biggest real estate mistake of my life when I sold it thinking that the market was going to crash, and I was dead wrong, and it went up by like $150,000 in the next 6 months. Whoops.
Even all the properties I've ever sold, like I had to sell them to get the next one. Like I would have kept it if I could. I still look back and I'm like, shit, like look what it's worth now, like if I had found a way to keep it somehow, my net worth would have been way bigger.
That's something my dad's always said too, is if you're buying real estate, hold on to it. Like he had a duplex in Vancouver, and he sold it for, I think it was probably about $500,000. And it's the same as, like, I mean, you talk about your first house being a stepping stone and not being that great. My first house was a 50-year-old house on a not so great neighborhood street that's now gone up it's doubled in value. And now I've got it rented out as a rental property. It's a stepping stone. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, one of my tenants asked me, he says, are you thinking about selling? I'm like, oh yeah, if I go to sell it, I'll let you know. But personally, I want to hold on to it forever.
Yeah.
Pay it off.
Why would you sell it?
Exactly. passive cash flow.
Yeah. Can you guys fill me in on this? So I think this is how it works. So let's say you want to get into the property market and you can afford to buy your first place. Your first place is your principal residence. So you just need the minimum down payment in Canada to buy that property if you choose to do so, right? Then let's say you live there for 3 years and you want to buy your second place, but you want to keep your first place. The second place, you still don't have to put down 20% because you're moving in, but then the first place turns into an investment and you could take equity out. Is that how it works on your end?
Yep, absolutely. More or less.
Yeah.
The big things is like with CMHC, you can't have multiple properties insured with CMHC.
Gotcha.
So if you did 5% on your first one and you want to do 5% on your second one, you have to go to one of the other two insurers.
Gotcha.
Which is not a problem. And then, if you've gained enough equity in that first property that it's now got more than 20% equity in it, you can absolutely pull money out of that one and use that to purchase your next property.
That's exactly what me and my wife did.
Yeah.
We like our house, we boosted the payments. You know, we had the basement suite. We paid what we wanted instead of what we had to, which was higher than what the actual payment was. And over time, that put the balance back down. And you know, people say, "Oh, you know, don't pull the equity out. It's in there." I'm like, no. Pull the equity out. Buy the other house. Use it. You built it. Use it. So we ended up pulling the equity out of that one. Bought this place. That one's a rental. It's making, you know, over $3,000 a month. And this one is, you know, we put 20% down on this one. So we had the extended amortization up to 30 years. It worked perfectly. But it all kind of starts with, you know, getting into the market. Like you said earlier, like you're not going to always get what you want, but you get what you need. And as long as you get your foot in that door, that's when it starts growing, right? So
my kind of like wow moment was I sat down with the guy that owns my company, and he pulled out a piece of paper and he wrote down like, okay, how much money do you think you need per month to retire? And I'm like, I'm 30, man, relax. but I thought about it. I was like, okay, let's do this. He's like, okay, so where's that money going to come from, right? And you can go, you know, on the investment side of things, in the financial markets, or you can look at the property side of things. So currently I own 4 properties, not all 100% on my own, but I'm into 4, and one of them is a 5-plex. So I have 9 doors total. And if I look at the remaining mortgage balance on them all, he's like, okay, so at some point, if you don't sell any of these, because you're only 30, like all of them will be paid off in the next 20 years, or at some point. So by the time you're 50, all these will be paid off. The current rent you're getting today minus the expenses, what does each of these give you per month in cash flow? Because they're strictly an income generating asset at that point. And he's like, don't even focus on the equity, even though obviously that's what you focus on because that's your net worth. He's like, who cares for a second? Like because if you sell it, you get it, but then it sits in your bank account and then what, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, hey, how many properties do you need paid off at a certain point in your life, and how much are they generating? And you add that all up, and does that service your retirement? And so that's where I've gone all in on, like, you know I sell real estate for a living, but if I look at my net worth and my potential retirement in the future, how it's going to happen, it's from owning real estate, not selling real estate.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, totally.
100%.
Yeah, I was always taught the same thing. It's like you figure out how many properties you would need to own in order to replace your income. And if it's 10 and they're each going to cash flow $2,000 a month, that's $20,000 a month you've got. And then they just start paying themselves off at a rate of basically 1 every 2 or 3 years. Well, and if they're paying themselves off that fast, well, then you go and you buy more. And that's how that snowball happens, where you find guys who have 100 doors. That's why. It's because they just got to that original 10. But I think there's another important piece to that. And this is something that we always show our clients. And I got to get rid of this don't have family money slide, but there's like we call this the evergreen investment pyramid, because the mistake a lot of people make is they jump right into real estate and they don't do it with all the things to back them up. So we always talk about it from the perspective of everything on this pyramid supports everything above it, and everything below it supports the things that are you need the things below it that to support the things above it. And we talk about getting an income, and I talk about scalable income and finding income where you get paid based on performance. Then we talk about getting insurance when you need it. So when you have dependents, if you don't have dependents, you probably don't need it. And we say do this early. If you're planning on having kids, do it at 20 or 25 years old, because it's going to be significantly cheaper, and just get a term life plan that goes out for the long term. And then start worrying about savings. Then take advantage of every tax-free opportunity you have to save money. We should probably add what is it? The first
FHSA.
Yeah, that thing. There's a video on my YouTube channel about it, and then I've since forgot it. So use those tools. Anything that is tax-free, anything that is tax deferred, absolutely use it. Use the tax-free growth stuff first, and then you buy the home. And you buy the houses and condos. And then once they start paying themselves off, you get into the apartment buildings. And then once you've got a couple of apartment buildings, you get into commercial and then land. And then maybe you start becoming a developer. The mistake people make is they try to do the developer piece first, buy the piece of land, knock it down, build the house. And that's the fastest way to see your income shoot past zero on the way down, because you don't have all the other things to support it. So what we really try to get across is, don't go straight into investing in real estate. Make sure you have the savings and whatnot first, and make sure that you've got the scalable income that that if those properties went vacant, you can still afford to support the payments and whatnot on it.
That's great.
That's a conversation I have with lots of clients when they talk about like buying rental properties and stuff. It's like, okay, I get it. Vacancy rate super low, really low. But if we set you up with this property, your GDS and TDS, like, because we do have lenders when you're doing 20% down, you can go extended ratios and stuff. And it's like, at that point, you're spending a very large amount of your income on this mortgage with the rent coming in and using the allowable amount for the qualifying. Get rid of that rent. What does that shoot up to? That's something you should look at, because if you can't service that and all of a sudden you got a couple of months without rent and you got 30 grand kicking sitting in your savings account, that's going to be gone.
Yeah.
I really like that pyramid though, Nolan. That was awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's just common sense, right? It's all about trying to prevent yourself from finding yourself in a really bad situation if the market turns. And I'm personally leaning more and more, as I build out the real estate portfolio, I'm leaning more and more to doing it with as little leverage as possible. So trying to stay kind of maximum at 65% loan to value on the entire portfolio. So in other words, 65% mortgages compared to the total value of the portfolio. And then as it starts to get back down to 50, then go and buy another property. But, lenders will let us go to 80%, no problem. I just don't necessarily think that from a safety standpoint, that's and a de-risking standpoint, that's where you want to be. Because I'm at the stage in my life at 40 where I'm starting to think about de-risking everything, versus 10 years ago, I was like, build. Now I'm like, keep, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Now in this market over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of winners and losers. There's been people who have bought at the top. There's people who are buying now who are essentially paying the same price because the interest rates are high. I know, and what I mean by the same price, it's like total cost overall over the lifetime is probably going to be pretty similar to buying today as it was buying in March of 2022. And then there's the people who bought in 2020 who got ultra low interest rates right before the market spiked, because they're like, I just don't want to live this close to my wife anymore. So I need a bigger house where her office is somewhere not nearby and the kids have a place to go that's not my kitchen table. And they just lucked out because they're like, oh, lifestyle is important, right? But I know, Tom, you made a video on this on your YouTube channel recently. Tell me a little bit about that and your thoughts.
Yeah, so why don't we start with the losers, right? So I made this clear as well on my channel, is that I'm not calling these people losers. It's just mathematically they are negative compared to the winners, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, the obvious, like the person that's feeling it the worst on both sides is if you bought in most markets across Canada in February of 2022 at the peak of the market and you took a variable rate. Not only is your house worth less today than it was when you bought it, but your payments have skyrocketed. So
that sounds oddly familiar.
Yeah. that is, yeah. That would be like the number one on the list, right? In the second one, which I had a little bit of trouble saying this, but I thought about it more. I was like, no, it's the truth. Renters. It's like, did anyone win in the last 18 months? Did anybody win? Yeah, there we go. So there's the video. And rent's gone up all across Canada, right? And a lot of people said also, I think a few people said like people that bought cottages are losers too. I would disagree in some markets. And then the people that are also losers, and I happily said that I am one of these people, is I took a static variable rate on one of my properties, and I've hit my trigger rate twice, actually 3 times. I've gotten three letters because I bought it in 2021. It wasn't like I didn't have it from previously, right? And so at this point, I'm essentially on that specific mortgage paying almost interest only. I'm a loser on that property, like 100%.
Yeah, you should have used a mortgage broker.
I don't know. It was so much lower at that time. Like,
it's funny because I think I have one client who has one of those static payment variables just because they were adamant that they had to go to this select lender.
Yeah.
TD.
And yeah.
Not
Try
TD?
not to name names,
TD.
but it's TD. It's TD. But they came back to me. They're like, yeah, I got the letter about my trigger rate. And I'm like, so you remember when I told you to take the adjustable one, even though it's a little bit higher?
And can I tell you guys, I've been making real estate content for 5 years at least consistently. And I know I'm not a mortgage broker, but I had no idea there was 2 types of variable rates until a year ago. I had no clue.
It's funny too, because like I'm a mortgage broker, and I think to myself, I'm like, oh, people know that. Like that's common knowledge, right? No, it's definitely not.
Yeah. One of the winners, Nolan, is what you just brought up there, was someone somewhere took a 10-year rate just over 2% in 2020. Somebody's laughing somewhere.
I mean, and in 5 years, that's a 3-month interest penalty to pay it out.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
I had a client, and I thought I'm looking at the comments, by the way, on this videos, because sometimes you didn't get roasted as bad as I thought you were going to get on these comments. Of course, Karish was sitting here saying, "I'm sure glad I own and didn't panic sell my investment property last year," which he did. That's public info because he's talked about it on the podcast. But I had a client who I thought she was crazy. She's like, "I want a 10-year rate." I'm like, "Fine." Really good client. I don't ever do buy downs for clients, but I can't remember why on this one. I offered her a rate that was not the face rate on the mortgage. It was like the one time that I did it. And I misquoted it, and we made 0 money on that mortgage. And it is the lowest rate 10-year we ever did at 2.04. And we made absolutely no money on it, which usually on 10-year mortgages, mortgage brokers make double what they would on a 5-year mortgage. So it was kind of a crappy well, no, she's a great client. She sent us a lot of referrals, and I love her to death. But I thought she was nuts for wanting that 10-year rate. Absolutely.
Yeah, she's laughing. She's laughing somewhere.
Yeah, I think they paid it off too, which was a good thing.
And then if we want to stay positive for a second here, we can go over a few of the winners, right? Because not everyone was a loser. There actually people came out ahead here. So obviously, if you were one of those super lucky people that very small portion took the 10-year in 2020, you're laughing. Obviously, if you took a 5-year fixed under 2%, 1.5%, some people were getting in 2021. As long as you didn't buy at the peak prices, you're still probably going, okay, I like this. Everyone's talking about everything changing, but my payment hasn't changed yet, with a big asterisk point at some point, right?
Yep.
But then the most recent winners, and this is like something I couldn't have guessed, is we had clients, even though I think you should always do what's more difficult first, meaning like if selling's more difficult, do that first, right? Like, I don't know who said this on our podcast, but like, would you rather be broke or homeless? Like, which one's scarier to you? Like, that's why we do one thing first or the other thing first.
Yeah.
But we had some clients that are like, okay, I have an asset that's going to sell. Sure, it's not going to sell for what it was going to sell for before, but I want to buy first. I want to know we're getting the property we actually want. I don't want to be in a rush to make that purchase. I'm like, okay. So we had people that bought in January and February this year that got 90-day closings, 120-day closings, that we put their property onto the market. No, this is good. We put their property onto the market in March and April. And the Toronto market has gone up 11% from January 1st to the end of April. So they bought when everyone was still being told don't buy. And then they sold as things started going up. So they got more for their house than they ever thought. And they bought at a price that when they close on that property, it's going to be worth more than they paid. Now, no one can say they did this on purpose. This was a fluke for anyone that fell into this category. But they are winners in terms of mathematical winners. And then I guess cash buyers are winners, but I don't know how many people are buying cash because they're actually getting the real discount.
Yeah.
And then upsizers. Like I really do believe that people that went from a lower price property to a higher price property before prices started ticking up again, they mathematically have come out ahead. They're not going to like their mortgage payment necessarily for the next little bit, but perhaps on the tail end of that, they're really going to see, they bought that property for 200 grand less than the peak, but only sold theirs for 50 grand less than the peak. So they're $150,000 ahead. But then they'd be winners in my mind.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, there's you and I disagree on this, and that's okay because I think having different opinions and then people making their own decisions is important. But I think there's two ways, and maybe you don't disagree on the pre-condo stuff, but on the selling or buying first, I know we have opposite opinions on this. But to me, there's like two ways to potentially see things get really catastrophic really slowly. And that is, and you don't see it come. You see it coming, but you don't see it coming, and then it's really bad. And that's buying a pre-construction property when the market is either flat or starts to go down. And the second is selling a property when you don't have a backup plan, and can afford to basically buy it cash or have somebody that can help you afford to buy it when you've already bought a property prior to that, right? So basically, like buying first and then selling to me is really sketchy, especially in a market like right now. But some people do it because that's what they're comfortable with, and the people like you talked about in January, one doing that, which is awesome. And really, what it comes down to is like the winners and the losers here. None of them did it with the intention of timing the market. They just got lucky. And that's why we always talk about get in at the earliest time you can get in when it makes sense for you, and you're going to be able to afford the payments and hold the property. But if you think you're going to like time the market and buy next year when things are cheaper, or when interest rates go down, or when interest rates go up, you're crazy. Like it's
and like time typically heals all. That's what someone wrote on my video. Like time heals all in real estate, not in every market. But so even the ultimate losers here, buying at the peak with a variable rate, in 10 years from now, they could consider themselves winners. Like it's possible, right? So you just never know.
And 25 years from now, if they did hold on to the property, they are definitely going to be winners. Like there's no doubt about it. Right? Here's a funny one for you. Have you guys been watching the NHL playoffs?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. Have you guys noticed there's two big companies, mortgage companies, banks that are advertising. There's Dominion Lending Centers with the
Buffer guy.
Bruce Buffer ads, which we're a member of the DLC network, the DLC group. So Miles and Greg no longer are. They went to a different network, but that's the I'm just saying that for disclosure for some reason, because I don't want people saying I was bashing on DLC or promoting DLC. But the other one is TD, and they're promoting variable rate mortgages again as the flexible mortgage where you can increase your payment or reduce your payment. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? You guys are promoting variable rate mortgages with all the people that you have in variable rate mortgages that are way behind. You guys are like, pick this mortgage. It's really good right now. At no less, 7.2% is the price of a TD variable rate mortgage right now. And on top of all of that, I don't even like.
You're getting stressed at 9.2%.
Yeah, qualifying becomes fun at that point.
It's like they're also selling fixed rate mortgages for 5%. It's like, how are they? I wonder if the reason why they're doing that is to make people who have these variable rate mortgages for the last 2 years feel better about the variable rate mortgages they have.
And maybe it could be just like when people said you're crazy to buy. Some people are looking like winners right now when we all think it's insane to take a variable. Like rates drop significantly next year, like we never saw coming, and then you look like a genius. So it's like, you just never know.
Well, there's no crystal ball, right?
Probably safer to say take a variable now than this is in total hindsight than saying take one a year ago, right? Like, because you don't think it's going to go up as much as it could go down in the future, but we never know.
No, listen, like 2 years ago, Tiff Macklem was telling you rates are going to stay low. Jerome Powell was telling you rates were going to stay low. It seemed like it was pretty reasonable to stick with a variable rate because rates were going to stay low. And then they let me drive that ship through the Suez Canal, and they let me run China for a couple of months. And I basically said everyone had to stay home for like the entirety of basically the last 2 years. So it's my fault that everyone who has a variable rate ended up with higher interest rates. But all of a sudden, interest rates went up a ton overnight. And it's like, so now we're like, okay, but it seems like it'd be safer now. It seemed like it was safe way back then.
Right.
Like, otherwise, nobody would have, if it didn't feel safe, 75% of Canadians wouldn't have chosen a variable rate mortgage, right? So I just think it's wild to think that for TD to be advertising that at all.
It was also, I remember during that point where Bank of Canada hadn't started significantly increasing yet, but the fixed rate had already jumped up, and there was a huge delta. I don't know like what the max delta was at some point in 2022, but people were going like, yeah, okay, I'm going to take variable because it's so much cheaper. Even if rates go up, there's still so much room here. Yep. And I'm getting qualified for more money because I'm being stressed less because the rate's so much lower, right? So yep. It's like they were almost like, not to say they had to do it or anything, but you look at all the numbers and you're like, this seems safe enough. Obviously wasn't, looking back.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is nobody could really predict what was going to happen and how it happened, and we all slowly watched it happen, and in some cases catastrophically. Right now, the good news is that clients are being given opportunities to continue to make their mortgage payments, and they're for the most part, the defaults are still pretty low, which I think is a positive thing if we can just get through it over the next couple of years, right?
Did the Q1 default numbers come out yet? I haven't seen them.
Or
Q4 maybe?
Miles, have you looked at CMHC numbers?
No, I haven't seen anything come out yet.
I know they were still low, and I can't expect that they're going to be higher at all.
Yeah, I didn't see any headlines with something super scary about default, so I'm assuming they didn't look that bad.
The defaults in mortgages right now are still quite low, but they're starting to see interesting increases on the defaults and the missed payments on stuff like credit cards, lines of credit, car loans, and all that sort of stuff.
Starts, right?
100%. And I mean, some of the economists and stuff are saying too, like we should start to see unemployment increase, right, and stuff like that. And if that happens, then you're going to see the car loans, the credit cards, and all that sort of stuff go up. Which, you know, I mean, during COVID, a lot of people paid off a lot of debt, but now it's starting to creep back up. So it's to be honest with you, like, I mean, when it comes to mortgages and increased interest rates, that's never really freaked me out. Mainly, probably because I have a high risk tolerance because I work in it every day, you know. But the high credit card balances and stuff like that that gives me pause.
Well, and did you see what happened at the Berkshire shareholders meeting there, and the conversations that Warren Buffett had around their companies and the inventories that they have? And the fact that a lot of the companies are going to have to put a lot of their goods on sale because of how much inventory they have, and the fact that the buyers have disappeared, which I think ultimately could lead to some unemployment. And you're seeing it in the US. You're not seeing it so much here. Although the reason you're not seeing it so much here is because we've got significant growth in immigration. It will come. It will happen at some point because we're starting to see some of the immigration numbers start to slow down right now. But it's interesting because the way that an economy really does start to see a major reduction in inflation is when you start to see unemployment. And when you start to see unemployment, people can't pay for things, and that's when you start to see those defaults on mortgages and everything else. And the question is, can Tiff Macklem and Jerome Powell manage that in such a way that it ends up being a soft landing, as they would like to call it? So in other words, minimum pain with maximum effect type thing.
What's the next thing we're waiting for? Like, it's got to be the amortizations, right? Like if the banks change their mind, or they because, you know, it's like, what were we waiting for before? It was, well, we were waiting for the trigger rate, then the market's going to crash, right? And then, okay, well, banks made that, so that didn't happen. Before that, it was the mortgage, like the deferrals during the pandemic. Well, wait till the mortgage deferral. There's always something like, that's what I find kind of amusing about the YouTube comments is, you can't argue. You cannot like the numbers, but the numbers are the numbers. But it's always like, well, just wait 6 months until this happens. And then 6 months goes by. It's like, whoa, wait. Wait, something else is coming. It's like, okay, I'm waiting.
Yeah,
I mean, the bubble's been supposedly going to pop for the last, 10, 12, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe, but this is the next thing, right? This is what I'm being told now by not skeptics, but people that are more housing bears is like, well, just wait, because when unemployment hits and they can't make the payments, even with their amortization stretched, then it's going to get bad. So wait for that. And maybe they're right. I don't know.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, if and a lot of these guys want to use history as an indicator, right? They want to use that as the map. And if you want to use that as the roadmap, the reality is we don't know what's going to be the thing that brings it crashing down until that thing happens. And what we know right now is that none of that stuff is happening at this moment. And it's going to be the Lehman's Brother collapse type thing that blindsides everybody. That's going to be what collapses the Canadian real estate market if it collapses. But as of right now, the major things would be change in political sentiment. Could have a major effect. And if inflation numbers don't start coming down, we could see even more and higher interest rates. And if we see that, then you can pretty much rest assured that there's going to be political changes. And if there's political changes, that gets really, really interesting. In the UK this week, they relaunched 100% financing.
Wow.
I saw that.
Yeah.
And it was to get renters into the market. That was like the line behind it, right?
Exactly. They're trying to get renters out of being renters and into owning homes, which, I mean, I think that's if you look at the Stats Canada's numbers, they don't lie. Somebody who's 65 who owned a home has a $900,000 net worth, and somebody who's 65 who didn't own a home has like a $40,000 net worth, or whatever the numbers were. But they were that drastic. So getting people into homes really over the long run does have a positive effect, not just for the economy, but for the individuals they're putting into homes, right? Now, speaking of what's happening in other countries, before we started this call, we were talking a little bit about the Australian model and the open bidding. You had some insight on that, Tom, with respect to what might be coming down the road and the potential results.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you go back to the last federal election, Trudeau was very clear on one of the things he was promising was the end to blind bidding, right? Very clear on that. And even CREA and Realtor.ca has announced that they'll be bringing an open auction program to their site that the public can see. They haven't quite figured out what program it's going to be. And still, you're at this point in time as recording this, sellers can choose if they want it to be open or closed, they can choose. And I think a lot of people say, well, if it wasn't blind bidding, it would make homes more affordable. And this is where we go to like, okay, well, now we have a little bit of data on this, and we can look at other countries like Australia that do and they're even more like, it's just like one person in front of a house doing a live bidding. This is a bit more like, okay, there's still being represented on each side, but it's just open and you can visually see everything, and maybe less emotional because you're not like literally standing there looking at the house as it's happening. But there's a product. I'm not going to name it yet because there's many of these products. I don't want to clump. I'm just going to clump them all in as one. But that's rolling out in the States right now in many markets. And essentially, the property can still be on the MLS system, but then you go to this website to make your offer. And there's three prices. There's the MLS price. There's the lowest committed price, which is this is the offer price I'm willing to start the conversation at, which is usually the same as the MLS price.
So
and
that's
then there's
the buy it now button.
No, and then there's a buy now button.
Oh, not really?
So,
wow.
Yeah. So what happens is there's a minimum price that you have to bid that then will start it. And then the clock starts ticking, whether it's 3 business days, 5 days, whatever. And then everyone can see what's the offer on the house. And each new offer, I believe, has to be, I think, 0.5% higher. So you can't do like the 1 cent, $1 thing and just keep going over and over. And if you have conditions in your offer will be devalued by a certain amount because the conditions are in there. This is all public, and you can see exactly on it what they value the conditions at or the lack of the conditions at and everything. And if you just really want this property, there's a button at the top that you can buy it. It's yours. You click that button, the house is yours. Now, what's interesting here is now this is probably the most fair way to do it, the most transparent way to do it. Everyone sees what everyone else is offering. And if you want it, you can have it. But what's interesting is an agent that I talked to that's used this, and they list a lot of homes in their area. Their properties on this system are selling for 7% higher than their properties on MLS. And more than half the time, someone's clicking the buy now button.
Wait, so they're selling for more, not less?
No, more. Because if you told me, like, I had this recently last week, we had clients that they were bidding on a place with a bunch of other offers. And he's like, I wish I could just buy it. I wish I could just have it.
Yeah.
So some people, if you solve their problem for them, are willing to overpay for that thing because it's done. There's no more stress. There's no more anxiety. It's done.
Yep.
And this buy now price does have to be a firm offer. There can't be conditions. So you got to figure it out beforehand. But something like this will come. It's going to happen. And we're all going to say, great, this is what we wanted. And then what's going to be funny is we're going to start complaining, saying, oh, wait, the old system was better, actually. Because if I knew what the other person, I wish I didn't know what they were at because I didn't actually want to go that number. I just did it because emotions kicked in, right? So,
yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I, like Miles, grew up in a real estate mortgage family. My father was a realtor. My mom worked for Bank of Montreal. But I spent a lot of my childhood going for like adult lunches with not that kind of adult lunches, but going for lunches where there was 5 realtors sitting around a table and me at like 5 or 10 years old. And, I got to know a lot of them really, really well. When I got in the industry 20 years ago, I got to have a lot of really interesting conversations with guys who'd been in the business for 40 years, including my dad. And what's interesting is the reason the blind bidding thing came up was because prior to the 1990s, or maybe it was the 1980s, that's exactly what happened. People would go and they'd, in a competing offer situation, it would be everyone knew what was on the table. And one guy could go, well, I'll pay 500. And then the next guy could go, well, I'll pay 550. And then the next guy would go, well, I'll pay 6 and 650. And it literally turned into a scenario where people were losing their shirts because they got into, instead of bidding wars, they got into pissing matches. And this was when like cars were lined up in front of the house and everyone could see everybody else and all the realtors were in the room together. And they literally put the blind bidding system in place because there were so many problems with the open bidding system. And that's really like, it's a careful what you wish for scenario. It's 100%. Like, if you ask for this or this or this, you're creating other problems somewhere down the road. I mean, I think we're going to see it in BC with their new rules, which Steve can talk about when we have him on the show, but with basically the ability to walk away from an offer after a certain period of time, the cooling off period. We're going to see this with CREA getting into some things where I think you mentioned it, Tom. They were talking about not allowing people to, or realtors or consumers, to pre-market the properties that they're listing, which is hilarious because I think and CREA is not the regulator, when the regulators get involved and they see that CREA is trying to mandate what a seller can do to sell his property, and CREA is saying, we don't care about the lawful instructions from the clients to market this property for all it's worth. It has to be on the MLS this fast. I think it's an interesting road we're going down with respect to just too much complaints from small minorities that changes rules, and then rule changes have different effects that become just as bad, if not worse, right?
Totally. It's funny because basically, long story short, CREA is saying if you're going to publicly market a property, which is anything other than a one-to-one phone call to someone else, right? Mm-hmm. Or a one-to-one conversation, publicly market it. Send a blast email, put it on social media. It has to be on MLS within 3 days. Now, this isn't coming into place until 2024, but it's voted on, and 82% of people voted on it. And we had talked about it, and I put up an Instagram post saying, like, is this what we need, or is this just a power grab to keep everything on MLS? And I got quite a few DMs of people, and I was like, hey, man, it's a clickbait. I'm just trying to get you to click on the link. Like, go watch what I was talking about. But, and he's like, 82% of people voted for it. I'm like, oh, like I was genuine. I was like, I didn't get an email to vote for this. He's like, oh no, you don't vote for it. The boards vote for it that you voted in. I was like, okay. Mm-hmm. And then I was talking to Steve, and like, I don't know. I was just in my own mind. Steve's like, Oh, so yeah, the real estate boards voted in favor of keeping all the listings on the real estate boards. And I'm like, oh my God, how did I not like click in here? Like,
oh, that's beautiful.
And the best
there's lots
part
of good people. I know lots of people on that board, and I get they're coming from a good place, a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's one of those things where it's probably the fair thing to do, but you're still telling someone how they're allowed to sell their own property.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's going to end pretty fast. Like I said, when a consumer goes to a regulator and says, hey, I want to put the sign up 30 days in advance because I want everyone to know it's going to be for sale. And I want them standing on the doorstep the day that it is for sale. And this rule is going to make it so that I can't sell my property for as much money. It's done before it started. I can't believe they're actually spending time on having the conversation.
Yeah, it didn't come out of nowhere. Like we had heard about it a little bit, but I'm surprised how it just happened, and we're all like, all right, I guess. Like, it is what it is now.
It's like the real estate boards ran out of things to do. I don't know if you guys have heard what was happening in Calgary, but the Calgary Real Estate Board tried to disband itself, and it obviously got voted against by all the realtor members. But yeah, they basically said they wanted to roll themselves up into AREA, which is the Alberta Real Estate Association, and just not have one of the biggest cities in Canada have its own independent real estate board. It was pretty wild. Like it's like they literally just ran out of things to do and things to talk about. And,
well, I can tell you for the first time in I think 15 or 20 years, my real estate board is we're voting very shortly about increasing our fees for the first time in a long time.
Wow.
And I'm getting weekly emails. And again, I have no issue with anybody at my real estate board. That's not what I'm saying here, but like, it's just interesting. I'm getting weekly emails saying like, vote yes. They're basically telling me what to do. Like they're not being like, just come in and take an opinion. They're like telling me what to do to raise the fees because it's going to be better long-term because we're going to need the money. And I'm not arguing with them that it's the right or wrong thing to do. But it is interesting that it's more like hey, like you should do this and here's why, not here's both sides. It's just, yes, do this because yes, we've already looked at this, just do it.
Yeah. We've done the research for you so you don't have to.
Basically. Basically. And it's going to work. People are going to vote yes, 100%. Like not 100%, but it's going to happen. It's going to go through.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, hopefully it is, because if it's something that needs to be voted on in order for the board to survive, and you got to remember, like the Toronto Real Estate Board is really they've been crucial in maintaining the Canadian real estate market and protecting the Canadian real estate market, because the Competition Board really tried to take a run at TREB a few years ago. And a lot of those court cases set a precedent for different types of Competition Board cases. And without if I'll vote yes if TREB wants to increase their fees, because they did a lot to help protect the industry. And when I say protect the industry, I mean protect consumers as well, because there was a lot. If it didn't go down the way it went down, there was potentially going to be a lot of companies out there who are saying, here, selling a house isn't a big issue. It's no big deal. Just go ahead and put it on the listing thing and then just, scribble something out on a piece of paper and you'll be fine. And I'm sure glad that it didn't go that way, thanks to the work that they did. So
yeah, it's good that people have options. Like I think all the models are great. But for me, it's just like running the numbers every year, looking at the CREA data, or even I like looking at the NAR data as well for the states, because they're just so much bigger than us that it's usually pretty similar, but just on a bigger scale of just like who uses what types of different selling services, and whether it's full service or discount or whatever, it all exists. And I think it's good that consumers have choice, but they're also being very clear with the choices that they're making, that people that come to the table backed with value and knowledge and understanding, and not just experience, because doing something a long time doesn't just mean you're good at it, right? You can just, I've been technically playing hockey longer than Connor McDavid. Doesn't mean I'm better than him, which obviously I'm not. Anyways, that's a stupid comparison, but you get what I mean, right? Experience doesn't. But what I'm trying to get at here is like, people want value. They want you to have skin in the game. They want knowledge. They want you to walk you through it. And if you just show up and your only proposition is I'm cheaper and sign here, it's like you'll get a little bit of business, but you're not going to last that long typically.
Totally. One of my favorite things my dad said when it comes to experience is you always know that somebody doesn't know what they're talking about when they start to use their experience as a argument. So I've been doing this for 20 years. It's like, congratulations. Do you have a meaningful argument, or do you just want to talk about how it's been too long?
I'm really excited for Greg to hear you say that, because like anytime me and him argue about the business, the first thing he says, I've been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a dad's prerogative, right?
That is a dad thing, right? Like, but
what he's saying is, I raised you, and you had to listen to Nolan to learn everything that I taught him, so that you could regurgitate it back to me.
I don't know if he was proud at that point in time or just really pissed off.
I was proud. I was pretty proud.
I made Nolan proud. I'm good. I'm good.
You'll have to watch one of the other episodes for that, Tom. We had a really interesting conversation about the fact that Miles called me up one day, and that's how this whole show started. And he started telling me about economics and mortgages and things. I'm like, wow, man, you've really gotten smart about all this stuff. And he's like, yeah, I just been listening to you. I'm like, yeah, you know where I got it all from?
His dad?
And he's like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Check it out. Exactly.
That is so funny.
Siri's in my pocket yelling at me. But Tom, I really appreciate you you coming on the show. Look forward to being on yours again here sometime soon.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And we're gonna have to get Steve on, because I know that he really gets jealous when you get to do things that he doesn't get to do. But that being said, because he's beating you in the race to 10,000 subscribers, which we'll link to your channel and below, we thought it was only right that we give you the little boost first for the 6 people that will be watching this.
I appreciate it. I can't believe he's beating me, that bastard. I'm gonna take him down. He might get there first, but you know, honestly though, I got to give him full credit. He works so hard on it and does such a good job with his editing and his videos that I'm just proud, because he did it faster than me, so I got to give him respect. So, well,
his thumbnail game right now is on absolute fire. You got to start paying him to do your thumbnails, right? So, but I mean, if you're watching this, make sure you go to Tom Storey's channel, hit the subscribe button, help him beat Steve Karish to 10,000 subscribers.
I think it's when I get to 10,000 subscribers, Nolan's giving away $10,000 or something along the lines of.
Hey, I'm pretty sure you have more money than I do, so you give it away, and I'll just hope I win.
Well, no, I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on. That was a really fun chat. I always it was nice to meet you, Miles, and always learn a ton chatting with you, Nolan. And I'm excited that you guys are doing this, because I don't want to I have to re-listen to our podcast sometimes, like make sure they're good. I don't want to listen to me and Steve talk anymore. I'd rather listen to you guys. So I'm excited you're doing this.
Well, and just to be clear, I'm doing it because I was jealous of you and the fact that you guys went ahead and did it. It's been such a huge success. So thanks for sharing that with me and allowing me to be on your show. And thanks for encouraging me to start doing this. It was that, and then the conversation with Miles that led to this. So
absolutely
appreciate you guys both.
Well, it's good that your voice is doing long form now, because I think people are going to learn a ton, and Miles as well. I don't know you as well yet, but I can tell you know what you're talking about too. And I think consumers are really going to enjoy this. So I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you.
Amazing. Cool. Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you.